Wouldn't it be awesome if there was an electric-powered rover that moved around on tracks, had tons of storage space for gear and supplies, and enough off-grid power to run all of your electronics? Then you could just rove around, searching for the perfect place to set up camp, and when you find it, easily unfold the built-in tent for some truly futuristic camping adventures. Now that sounds like it'd be pretty awesome, so I built it. And in this video, I'll be showing you every single step of how this amazing machine was built. Then we'll load it up with gear and take it out for a beautiful overnight adventure full of delicious foods, cozy camping, high-tech fun, and so much more. And it all starts with a big pile of steel tubing. For this project, I decided to use this square punch tubing with all the holes in it because it's lightweight, it's strong and made out of metal, and honestly, I had such a fun time using this building my last project that I've been looking for an excuse to build something else with it. So, let's get building. Step 1. Measure, mark, and cut all the pieces of square tubing that I'm going to need to build this project. Then, to give them some extra protection, hit them with the coat of this heavy-duty farm equipment paint. This stuff's great, it's super heavy-duty, and it's going to give an extra layer of protection on the whole project. And pre-painting all the pieces now makes it a lot easier than trying to paint everything after installing it. And one of the major benefits with using this square punch tubing is I can hold it all together with a whole bunch of nuts and bolts. And for this whole project, I'm going to be using these nylon lock nuts to make sure the bolts won't vibrate themselves loose. So let's build out this frame. After laying out the pieces and connecting them together with some bolts, we can see what the base is going to look like. The next part to make is going to be the control arms. And using some more of the square tubing, I build the sections that are going to connect the motors and the wheels to the rest of the frame. And for this project, I'm going to need 4 of these. Now, for installing the control arms on the rest of the frame, I'm going to be using these, which are some grade 8 bolts. All that means is they're a bit stronger and less likely to bend than your standard bolt. And that's just one less thing I have to worry about breaking when driving this thing around. I'm also going to be installing it along with these rubber spacers just to prevent any metal clinking and hopefully quiet the ride. And building the control arms out of the same material as the frame just makes installing them so much easier, as I can just literally use the existing holes to put everything together. Just another reason why I really like building things out of this material. And with the control arms attached, we can see how they're going to articulate. The next thing I want to introduce you to is the motor to how we're going to power this. Meet the mover. And this is a 48 volt 1000 watt brushless motor with built-in differential gears, and it's around 1.3 horsepower. I've used these motors for many projects in the past. They're super DIY friendly and they have a good amount of power to them. You can also find these axle kits that go along with them that just easily slot into the differential gears, which makes getting power to the wheels a whole lot easier. But for me, one of these motors isn't going to cut it. You see, I want to have it so I can power each of the wheel with its own motor, giving us more control and 4 times the power for right around 5.5 horsepower. And not only do we get more power with this setup, we also get the option for tank steering. By connecting each of the sides together, I can move them both to go forward, both to go backwards, or I can send each side in opposite directions so I can spin this thing around. The only problem is, since I plan on using each of these motors with only one axle, I am going to have to modify the internal gears a bit. And if we take a peek inside of the gears in the differential, we can get a better idea of what's going on. When I send power to the differential, we can see both of the wheels are spinning. Looks good. But things get a little funky when I only have one wheel attached. For this differential, it's always going to send power to the place with least resistance. And since I only have one wheel, it means all the power is going to be constantly going to the side where there's actually nothing attached. But I have come up with a solution. Use something to gum up those inner central gears so that when you send power to the system, it's going to act like a solid axle and send power out to both sides regardless if there's only one wheel attached. Sadly, when it comes to the real motors and gears, it's going to take a lot more work and something a bit stronger than bubblegum to keep these things from spinning. So it's time to bust out my little flux core welder. And I would consider this to be like the hot glue gun of welders. You can just plug it in the wall. It requires no gas. It has a trigger that you can just pull and it feeds out the metal, similar to a hot glue gun, but just a little bit scarier. But as long as you understand what you're doing and understand electronics a little bit, I think it's definitely the easiest type to pick up and you can do some pretty good jobs with it. After welding all those inner gears, we can see they're nice and locked down in place and there's no way these things are going to move anymore. Then it's as easy as reassembling the gear, placing it back inside of the gearbox, adding on some new gasket, which was honestly a really nice color, then give it some fresh gear oil and close it on up. And now we have ourselves our modified motor. And I went ahead and did it for all the other ones as well. With our motors modded, the next challenge is figuring out how to connect them together. And for this, I like to use black steel pipe and flanges. Mostly because you can find this stuff everywhere, it's super available, and it doesn't require that many modifications to get it to work. The first thing to modify is the hole placement on the pipe flange. It doesn't quite line up with the holes on the differential, but lucky enough, the differential comes with a gasket that you can use as a stencil to mark out where the new holes need to be. Then it's as simple as drilling them all out. Another bonus of using the black pipe is the pieces easily thread together to make sure everything's centered and nice and square. Even though the threads are probably nice and strong, I want to modify this one more time by using the flux core welder to weld all the threads together to form this into one solid piece. Once it cools down, it's off to the paint station to give this a nice solid coat of that nacho cheese. And since I have 2 of these axles, I have to make 2 of these middle sections. When installing the axles, I use some orange thread locker on the bolts just to ensure that they don't unwire themselves from the vibration of driving around. And just like that, we got both of our axles complete. Each side is independently controlled by each motor. They're nice and strong and ready to be installed in the frame, which is super easy. Just line it up with the control arms, thread in some bolts, and tighten it all down. A few bolts later, we got both of our axles nice and securely attached to the frame. Next up, let's give this thing a nice suspension. And you can probably guess why I picked these ones. I just like the color. Each control arm is going to get its own shock that I install with some more of those grade 8 bolts. For attaching the tops of the shocks to the frame, I lift it up, use some more of those grade 8 bolts and some of those rubber bushings, and then tighten it all down. This thing's really starting to come together. I can then take these 2 pieces of square tubing and attach them to the back half of the vehicle because these are later going to be used when attaching the tent, which is honestly something I'm super excited about. But for now, I think we gotta give this thing some wheels, because if you look closely, this thing's totally just riding on its brake rims, which is honestly not that good. So let's change that and get some wheels on it. Did I say wheels? What I meant to say is tracks, because that's right, it's time to use some tracks again. I've been a little bit nervous about this because I have used tracks on a previous project and they were absolutely awesome until they weren't, because you see, one of the tracks completely ripped off the vehicle and left me pretty much stranded, so it was kind of a bad experience with it. But I'm willing to give it another chance with these bigger tracks. These things are bigger and beefier than the previous versions of track I used, and when comparing it to the broken track, that one only had one set of rollers, which left a lot of pressure on the tracks, whereas this new version has a set of rollers on each side for better weight distribution. But honestly, I'm still a bit nervous about these tracks. They were big, heavy, and expensive and took a month to arrive, but there's only one way to see if they work, and that's to strap them on the vehicle and try these puppies out. And with the tracks attached, we can get a good idea of how this thing's gonna look. Boing boing. But right now, it's not very comfortable to sit on this thing as it's just a bunch of metal bars, so let's fix that up next. And in order to take care of that, I'm going to be using this pile of wood. And these are all pieces that I previously measured, marked, and cut out specifically to fit this project. And since a bunch of these pieces are going to be exposed to the elements, I want to give them a nice protective coating. And for whatever reason, whenever I work with this wood stain, it always makes me feel like having a nice big cup of coffee. I've used this wood stain in the past on another project, and I really like the way it turned out. So I make sure to give every board a nice thirsty coat of it on all of the pieces on both sides to ensure some nice weatherproof protection. And once the boards are dry, I take the larger ones over to the frame of the vehicle and lay them on top to form the base. To ensure the boards stay in place when installing them, I hold them down to the metal frame with some clamps. Another really great thing about using this square tubing is I can actually use the holes as a drill guide, so I can head underneath the vehicle, drill up directly through the frame up to the board to ensure that all of the holes are going to line up perfectly. With the holes drilled out, I actually want to take a Forstner bit so I can drill out a little indent section above each of the places I drilled, followed by some more of that wood stain. And this little indent section is going to be for when I place in a bolt and a washer. It's going to sit nice and flush with the surface of the wood. Then all I gotta do is tighten down all the bolts to the metal frame underneath. And now we have a really secure way to connect all of our boards. For these sideboards, since there are some bolt heads sticking out, I do have to drill out a couple indent sections on the bottom that line up perfectly with the bolt heads. Then I drill out all the holes through the boards and bolt it all down to the metal frame. And just like that, we have a really secure base secured down to the frame. One step closer to building this vehicle. But as it sits right now, it's not going to be very comfortable to drive this thing around. So let's give this a sweet little seat. And I've used these seats in the past. These things are absolutely fantastic. These are made for tractors. They have a built-in suspension in the back of them. They're nice and padded, and they also have a nice color to them. And installing it is super simple. I just make sure it's nice and centered, trace out some of the holes in the bottom of the frame, then I can just drill through the wood underneath, place in some bolts, and tighten it down. And just like that, we got ourselves a nice comfy seat. Beautiful. With our new seat attached, there's still a few more sections of the frame that I need to build out. Since this is considered a tinier vehicle for one of my builds, I'm going to run out of space pretty quickly, so that leaves me with a couple options. And for one of those options, I'm going to be building up, by building a roof rack on top. Not only is this going to add space when driving this thing around, I also think it's just going to look really cool. When building with this square tubing, I can't help to think about my dad's old erector set. I used to play with this thing when I was a kid. It's just full of a bunch of pieces of metal with some punched holes in it, and you just hold it all together with some tiny little nuts and bolts, which is honestly very similar to what I'm building and doing today. I'm not quite sure what it is, but there's just something about being able to bolt this whole structure together that really puts a smile on my face. And now we got a super strong roof rack ready to hold a whole bunch of weight, and with all the holes in the tubing, it's going to be super easy to ratchet everything down in place. I also want to install a couple handles on the front section of the vehicle using some more of the tubing, and I want these sections to be nice and strong so I have something firm to grip onto when I'm bouncing around. I'm also going to be using these handles to install the controls for each side of the vehicle. And speaking of controls, I think it's about time we figured that all out. Because this thing's not going to move until we hook up all the electronics. And I got some pretty sweet stuff in store for that. So let's start with these motor controllers. And these are rated for 48 volt motors at 1500 watts. I ordered 1000 watt controllers, and for whatever reason they sent me these ones. I don't think it's going to be a problem, and I'm going to go ahead and use these anyway. And since I have 4 motors, I'm going to need 4 of these controllers. And I want to make them a nice protective case. So I found this nice little container box. It's got a waterproof seal and nice clasps, and I can just barely get the controllers to fit. And to help with that, I'm going to be using some cutting boards. To be honest, I just really like this material. Not only is it great for chopping food, it's non-conductive, and it's also super easy to modify as you can just cut through the stuff like it's butter. And I'm going to be using this cutting board to actually mount the motor controllers on top of. And to help hold the controllers in place, I'm going to be using some of these machine screws with these nice socket heads on them. I use a marker to mark all the places all around the cutting board where the controllers line up, as well as a few other spaces I need to drill out. But instead of using a regular drill bit on this project, I'm going to be using this special type. It has like a stepped bit on it, and if you can see, when I line it up with the machine head screw, it almost lines up perfectly. And when using this drill bit to drill out all the holes in the cutting board, you can see it leaves this nice little stepped pattern inside. And that's going to be perfect so I can take my machine screws, screw them in directly to the holes I drilled, and they're going to fit nice and snug with the socket head locking in place. And on the other side, we're going to have a nice strong post where we'll be able to mount our electronics. And I'm going to be using this same technique to mount pretty much all of the electronics in this project, where I can just slip all the components in place on a couple washers, a lock nut, and a nut, and then tighten it all down to ensure all of the components are nice and secured to the cutting board base. Beautiful. I do have to extend the wires a bit on the controllers, just so that when I install them in the container, they're going to be able to reach the correct places. And in order to get some wires in and out of the enclosure, I'm going to be installing these, some cable glands. To install these, using a ruler and a marker, I mark a few places, take a hole saw, and just gently drill out all the holes. Then pop the cable glands in place, and on the other side, you tighten it down with the included nut, and we have some really nice places to run our cables. And I installed some on both sides. Now, for how I'm actually going to attach this to the vehicle, I'm going to use some 2x4s. And I'm also going to be using some of this clear double-sided tape. I love this stuff and I pretty much find an excuse to use it in all my projects. But for this case, I'm going to use it to build up a couple layers along the bottom, just so that it's taller than the little plastic molded feet, so that I can stick the 2x4s down on top of it. Then on the inside of the container, I place some more layers of the double-sided tape, so that I can take the cutting board with the motor controllers and stick it down in place. Then I can take some large wood screws and drill some holes through the cutting board, the layers of tape, into the wood underneath, so that when I screw it all together, it's going to be going through the tape for a waterproof seal and have a nice strong connection between the 2x4s underneath. I do have to add a couple more 2x4s under just to make sure I have proper clearance on the frame. With the 2x4 securely attached, it's time to drill out some holes on the sides of them, as well as some matching holes on the vehicle, so that when I'm ready to install it, I can easily install it with some bolts to the underside. Before I attach it to the vehicle, there's still a few more components I want to install. Like for one, this bus bar. I want to use this to distribute power to all the controllers. I also want to install some of these terminal blocks that are going to help connect all the signals for like the throttle, the reverse, and all the motors. To install these components, I modified another cutting board that I can slip over those large machine screws in the center. Then I can drop all the components in place and tighten them all down. I designed this board so I'd be able to remove it just in case I needed to swap out a controller. I then used my label maker to help organize and mark all them wires. So let's hook them all up. And for this project, I'm color coding everything with matching heat shrink tubing just to help with the organization. And with that, we have all of our signals from our controller side wired up. Then I can take all the positive wires and all the negative wires for the controllers and tighten them down to the bus bar. The wiring's looking super sweet, but we're still going to need a few more things. Like for one, we're going to need a way to control the throttle. So I got some of these nice little thumb throttles. I've used them in the past and they're just really nice ones, and you can mount them on a handlebar. And for controlling the forward and reverse, I got these nice little switches that you can also mount on a handlebar, and these are going to be perfect. And for this setup, each side is going to get its own set of controls. And to connect those up to these controller boxes, I'm going to be using some of this 5-conductor wire, which is just a wire with 5 tinier wires inside of it, 3 wires for the throttle, and 2 for the forward and reverse. I connect them all up to the terminal blocks with matching color heat shrink tubing for both sides. Then I can take both of the signal wires, feed them out through the cable glands in the back, so we can later hook them up to our controls. Before that, it's finally time to bring our controller box underneath the vehicle so we can connect up our motors, which is super simple. Each motor has its own hall sensor which has a quick connect, and then the power for the motors are nice and color coded. And I'm designing this system so that if anything breaks, I don't have to actually physically cut wires. I can just unscrew a few things, pop in a new piece, and we're good to go. The only thing left now to hook up to this controller box is going to be the main power coming in and out. But that's going to be coming later when we install our battery. I can now take the controller box, place it underneath the vehicle, line it up with the bolts I installed earlier, and tighten it down directly to the frame. And now we have a super secure box for all of our controllers with quick access in case we ever need to change anything. I'm honestly super happy with how the wiring on this project is turning out. I can then grab the signal wires, send them up front, so I can connect them up to the throttle and reverse switches. And whenever I'm connecting up some smaller gauge wires, I like to use these self-soldering heat shrink tubing wraps, which just use a heat gun to connect them together. I just find them a lot easier to use, especially when you have to make a lot of connections. I also added on a large piece of shrink tubing over all those connections, just to ensure some more protection. And now we have both of our controls for both sides. To hook them up to the vehicle, I ended up going with the solution of getting some more pieces of black pipe, flanges, and a couple caps. Turns out, this size pipe's almost the perfect diameter for all of these controls. After threading them together, it's off to the welder to make it more permanent and prevent these things from unrolling when I'm driving around. Then once they cool, it's off to the paint shop, which is just a piece of cardboard where I cover them with that heavy duty yellow paint. And we got ourselves some nice looking handles. And I want to install these on the sides of the seat right around here. But in order to do that, I have to add on a little bit of a spacer so it's wide enough to accept the base of the flange. Then I take some smaller bolts and tighten it down. Then it's off to the other side where I install that handle just the same. Before I install the controls, I take some electrical tape and wrap it around the pipe just to thicken up the diameter a bit and to give something for the controls to bite into. Then it's as simple as dropping the controls in place and tightening them down to the bars. And I go ahead and do it for both sides. And each handle is going to have its own forward and reverse and throttle switch. Pretty sweet. There is something else I want to install on the handlebar, and it's probably a good idea, and that is a set of hydraulic brakes. And these are super easy to install with the axles I got. They literally just slip over the ends, and you tighten them down with a few bolts. Then you can just run the wire up to the front, attach the brake handle, and now we got ourselves an easy way to stop the vehicle. Now that we can stop this thing, we're going to need something to start it. So, meet the battery. And this is a massive 48 volt 100 amp hour lithium iron phosphate battery. I absolutely love this thing. It has been the power source of so many of my different builds over the last few years, just pushing through everything I throw at it, and I couldn't be happier with it. So, I know it's going to do perfect inside of this build. In order to give it some extra protection from the elements, I want to build a nice little enclosure for it, using one of these storage containers. I start by taking some of that double-sided tape and placing a few pieces on the bottom of the container, so I can place in a couple of pieces of wood on top. Then I add in some cross beams that I screw directly down to the wood underneath. For the middle section, I take a piece of 2x4 and drill out some holes in the sides. And inside of those holes, I'm going to be installing some of these T-nuts, which is just like a spiky threaded insert that you can just pound into the side. And now you have yourselves some nice metal threads inside of these holes. Then I can take the board and install it in the middle with a couple screws. Since the battery's pretty heavy, I want to give it a nice little cushion seat, so I got some of this foam adhesive strip, and I install a whole bunch of pieces of it, sticking it down to the wooden base, to give our battery a nice comfy seat. With a nice strong base for our battery to rest, it's time to add a few more components to the box. Like for one, this heavy duty battery cutoff switch. I'm going to use this to be able to turn on and off power through our whole system. I'm also going to be installing this heavy duty quick connect. I honestly just thought this thing was really cool, and I wanted to find a way to incorporate it in this build. And of course, a couple cable glands as well. I then mark out where I want all the components to go, then I can take a hole saw and begin to drill out all the places. Then I can take some 5-minute epoxy, mix the stuff up, place it around all of the holes that I just drilled, and install all the components in place. And when it dries, we got our power switch, we got our cable glands, and we got our external power port as well. For connecting this up to the vehicle, I lay down a few pieces of the double-sided tape on the bottom, followed by some weather-treated 2x4s that I lay on top. Then on the inside of the container, I can take some larger wood screws and screw them directly down through the wood, the container, the layers of tape, into the wood underneath. Since the battery is a heavy one, I want something stronger than just a couple wood screws, so I end up drilling out each of the corners, so the holes are going through both pieces of wood. Then I can trim out some little indents, place in some large bolts going through the other side, so that I can bolt it all together for a super secure wood frame running through the container. Nice and strong. Time to show the battery its new home. To hold it in place when I'm driving around, I'm going to be using some of this threaded rod. And since I installed some of those threaded inserts in the middle board, I can just easily screw them in place. Now to hold it down, I ended up going with the idea of using a cutting board. And the benefit is I can actually mount some components on it. Like for one, this large 200 amp resettable fuse. I also got a bus bar to distribute power to everything. I also got this, which is a handy little DC to DC converter. It's going to take 48 volts from our battery and turn it down to 12 volts up to 20 amps, which is going to be super useful for things like our light system. And lastly, a tiny little bus bar that's going to be used for our 12 volt supply. After tightening down all the components to the cutting board, I add on some nice labels and stick on an aluminum bar in the center to add some strength, as this is going to be holding down the battery through those threaded rods. Then on the back side, I add some more of that adhesive foam just to act as a cushion on top of the battery. Now it's off to the battery box where I can install it with the threaded rod with some washers and wing nuts to tighten it down securely. And now we have a nice way to hold our battery in place and get some nice utility out of it as well. And wiring up the battery box is pretty straightforward. I run the positive through the switch in the fuse and connect it up to the little bus bar. Then I can distribute that to the motor controllers and also the little 12 volt supply. Then I take the main power wires for our controller box and feed them in through the cable glands so I can easily hook it up later. I can then bring the whole battery box enclosure to the back of the vehicle so I can line it up with where I want it, then drill out some holes in the 2x4 through the floor underneath on each side. Then I can throw in some large bolts and tighten it all down to the frame for a really nice secure connection of our battery box. Nice and solid. No way this thing is going to fall off now. Now I can take the main wires that are going to be for our motor controllers and hook them on up. But in order to do that, I actually have to drill a hole through the floor. So I can feed them through to the other side, hook them up through our controller box and tighten them down to the bus bar so we have power to our motors. Looking good. You may have noticed that on our big old battery box, we still have one unused cable gland. And I'm actually planning on using this part for our light system. Because yes, this thing's gotta have some lights. I think it'd be really cool to have these on at night. These are waterproof, super bright, and they're gonna be perfect for this ride. And installing them is gonna be super easy, as I can just literally use the frame itself to mount everything with a few bolts. And it's as simple as going around to all of the sides and tightening down each light. The lights did come with its own wiring harness, which is super easy to hook up, as I just used some of that self-soldering heat shrink tubing. It also came with its own switch, but I actually want to replace it with a switch of my own, one that I can attach to the handlebar, so I can easily connect it up and tighten it down along one of the handlebars right next to all the other controls for super easy access. For powering the lights, I run the power cord up through the hole in the floor and into the cable gland so I can hook it up to the 12 volt supply. And just like that, our battery box is finally complete. So let's test it all out. First things first, let's go ahead and kick on these lights. These things are nice and bright, got 4 of them, 2 on each side, and they should light up the world around me. I'm definitely excited about trying these out at night. I also thought it'd be smart to test out these motors, so I jacked up the whole vehicle so I can test them going forward, I could test them going reverse, and I could test out the brakes. Looking good. This thing is about to be so sweet. With the system running beautifully, it's probably not the best to drive this thing around with all these wires just hanging around. So let's do some cable management. And for that, I'm going to be using some of this yellow split tubing. This stuff is great. It's got this split along the center of it, and you could just use it to place around all the wires to easily protect them from sticks and stuff like that when you're driving around. And since I have this square punch tubing, I can easily just take zip ties to secure all of the split tubing down in place, which makes for some super quick and clean, easy cable management. This thing's starting to look pretty sweet if I say so. Got all these wires locked down, no longer have to worry about catching things when I'm driving around. You probably remember, but if we head over to the side of the battery box, you can see that we still have this external port that puts out 48 volts. And I want to take advantage of that by bringing along this thing, this massive inverter. This thing's a 48 volt, 1200 watt inverter, so this thing's going to pack a lot of power. And all this does, it's going to take 48 volts from our battery on the back side, and then on the front side, it's going to pump out 120 volts AC or your standard US house outlet. And I think it'd be pretty cool if I could bring this thing along with me. And similar to the battery box, I want to build its own enclosure out of another one of these storage containers. I like the idea that I'd just be able to stack it on top of the battery, and they're just some nice durable cases. So let's build it out. And similar to the battery box, I'm going to use some pieces of wood that I stick down with some double-sided tape and build out a strong wooden base. For mounting the inverter, I modified another cutting board that I can screw down directly to the wood underneath. Before I drop the inverter in place, there's a couple other pieces I want to install. Like for one, another one of these cutoff switches so I can turn on and off power to the inverter easily. I also want to install this, which is just a 120 volt outlet that I can install to the side of the case, and then a couple cable glands as well. So it's off to the enclosure where I can drill out all the holes, use some more epoxy, and glue all the pieces in place. I can then drop in the inverter, tighten it down to the screws in the cutting board, and then wire it all up. And it's super simple. I'm just running the positive to the switch in the side, and then plugging in the output port to the output on the inverter. Then I can close it on up and bring it over on top of the battery box so I can plug it in with the quick connect on the side. Then I can flip the switch and we got ourselves 120 volt AC wherever we want. How awesome is that? And I designed this inverter system so it's not actually a part of the vehicle. I can just easily remove it whenever I want, or I can bring it along with me. I am a bit worried about moisture in these boxes, so I ended up getting some of these desiccant packs which suck up any moisture, and I toss a bunch of them in the inverter box and the battery box as well. I also wanted to mention that for my inverter box, I purposely chose not to add any ventilation just because it's starting to become winter, but when it hits summertime, I'm probably going to have to add in some fans. Now, to hold it all in place when I'm driving around, I found these little self-ratcheting carabiner things, and I actually hook them onto the storage container clips themselves and pull it nice and tight. And after adding one on the other side and locking it down, we can see that this thing is on there nice and secure, while still being able to easily remove it whenever I want. For this next part, I'm honestly really excited about this. I found this super unique tent. The thing just unfolds in a few seconds, and it's a really unique design. It's like a cot, kind of like a bivvy, and kind of like a tent all in one. I've never seen anything like this, and the minute I saw it, I knew I wanted to find a way on how to incorporate it in this build. I just couldn't get the idea out of my head of this tent just unfolding from the back wherever I want in just a few seconds. And for how I'm going to install it on the vehicle, I got some of these pipe clamps, and I'm going to attach them to the metal frame of the tent, and I'm going to do it on the places that are open so I don't actually have to damage the tent at all. After installing 3 of them on the bottom of the tent, I can use the holes in the clamps to build out a nice solid metal frame with some more of the square tubing and tighten it all down. Then I can bring it over to the back of the vehicle, and using a large threaded rod, some of those rubber bushings, and some wing nuts as well, I can tighten the whole thing down to the vehicle. And now we have a nice pivot point on that threaded rod, so I can fold the tent up, hook it up to the roof of the vehicle, and using one of those ratcheting straps, tighten it down to the tent, so that it's nice and secure in place. And now, wherever I park the vehicle, I have a super simple way to set up a tent in just under a minute, which is just such a lovely thing, and it makes setting up camp just a breeze. And I'm honestly super excited to test this tent out as well. And cleanup itself is just as fast as you just reverse the process, fold it up, and tighten it down to the frame. I just think it's so cool. Now we're at the part of the build where it's time to address something. You can probably tell the vehicle, it's not super level right now. For whatever reason, these shocks, they're just not doing the job. They're supposedly rated for 1,500 pounds a pair, and honestly, I don't think that's true. So, as much as it pains me, I'm going to have to replace them with some stronger shocks. After a quick little shock swap later, we got our new ones installed. And you can tell, the vehicle, it's actually level right now. And these shocks, they are way stiffer and stronger than the last ones. Much, much better. It's definitely a bit of a bummer about those other shocks, but it's alright, they're just going to go in the pile of rainy day parts. Since installing the new shocks, it did lift up the vehicle a couple inches, so that does mean the tent is a little bit out of line now. So I have to uninstall the tent section, add on a couple pieces of tubing for a couple inches of drop down, and reinstall it in place to get everything back in line. Got it nice and level. Now that we got all of our major components of the vehicle installed, it's time to add on a couple little fun things. Like for one, I want to bring along this, a nice little water cooler. It's insulated, it's got a nice little faucet on the front, and it has these really nice clasps for the lid so that I can lock it in place when I'm driving around to keep the water in and keep the lid from falling off. I want to install the water cooler on the side of the vehicle, so I build out a little stand with some of the metal square tubing and a couple of pieces of wood, as well as some foam adhesive tape just to add a little bit of cushion for the water cooler when I strap it down in place. Looking good. I also got a couple of these small little survival boxes. They're watertight, and I thought they'd be pretty cool if I installed them on the vehicle. To install these, I use some double-sided tape to stick down some boards of wood. Then I drill out a couple holes in them that line up with the square tubing on the vehicle so I could just bolt them in place. And I installed one of the containers on each side of the vehicle. And now we have some pretty cool little side storage, nice and secure, and should be watertight. Since I have the water cooler on this side, the other side feels a little bit lonely, so I want to build a storage container over there, with, you guessed it, another one of these boxes. To install this one, I use some of the double-sided tape to stick down a board, then on the bottom, I use some more of the tape to stick down a couple 2x4s so I can screw them together through the container. Then, I can drill out a couple holes in the 2x4s that just line up with the holes on the square tubing, so that I can take some bolts and bolt it down to the side of the frame. And now we got ourselves a nice strong container that we can store a whole bunch of stuff in. Nice. I also want to install this flag that I made specifically for my last project because it's made of the original tarp that started a whole bunch of my projects. Like for one, the teepee I slept in the forest, my drivable camper, I used some of it on my boat, and the upgraded camper as well. So this flag really just represents where I came from, and I think it's important to bring it along with me. And in order to install it, I got myself a little flag holder. I did have to modify it by drilling out a couple holes so that I can easily mount it to the side of the vehicle with just a few bolts. And now we have a really nice way to display our flag when we're driving this thing around. So cool. I also got a couple of these little hooks that I want to install on the top of the vehicle just because it would be useful to have these if I want to hang things like boots or a coat or anything like that. And the final thing to install is gotta be the license plate. So it's off to the back where I screw in a small piece of wood and the license plate on top. And then it hit me. I accidentally bought the wrong number plate. Q04 was the plate that I bought for my last build. I guess I'm getting to the point where I build so many things I forget how many I've actually made. But after a quick little modification, everything's looking good. And that means the only thing left to do now is to load this thing up and take it out for a wonderful night. Let's have some fun.
Well, we made it out here. I'm gonna go in and flip off these lights. Don't really need those on right now, but it is sure a gray, kind of a rainy day with sprinkling a little bit on the way out here, but it should be stopping. But hey, we made it out here. Tracks, none of them ripped, full of dirt and everything. The control arms look fine. They don't look to be bent or anything. And it was actually a pretty smooth ride, to be honest, thanks to the shocks, and also the seat itself kind of has some shocks built in. Looks like our water is still on here, and this thing is pretty full to the brim of some nice cool water. The lights did fine. Tent's still here. We can see I got the big old battery, got the inverter, got some more camping gear on top. And on the roof section, got some more gear. Got my tent rainfly. Hopefully I won't need it. Got a chair, got my sleeping bag. This one's just full of all my camera gear. We got our flag up here. And on this orange one, I got just some emergency first aid stuff, some band-aids and sanitizer, stuff like that. I am super happy with how this thing got out here. None of the tracks ripped, which was really my main concern, having bad luck with the smaller versions in the past. So to get out here, we started at 100%, and right now it's at 87%. So we used around 13% of our battery to get out here, which is something we have to be aware of. I don't want to just run out of juice out here, otherwise I'm going to have to hire something to tow this or something like that. So that's just something I have to keep in mind for tonight, because I need at least 15% to get back tomorrow. But other than that, we can have some fun with the big old inverter and the big old battery. It's pretty cloudy and gray today for sure. Been waiting for like a whole week for the rain to stop so I could finally take this thing out. So the ground's pretty squishy around here. And actually, I kind of think that the camper, it's a little bit slanted right here. I might want to drive up a little bit where it's more flat. I don't know if I want to camp out where I'll be kind of leaning to one side. Yeah, and if I keep going that way, it just gets really, really muddy, especially with this last week of just constant rain. So I think I'm probably going to move up here a little bit where it's nice and flat, and I'll just set up my little camp. This is a bit better, a little bit flatter here, and the sun might be poking out a little bit. Feels nice. But yeah, I think it's time to unfold our tent and start to set up camp. Well, that was it. Tent set up. Took like 2 seconds. This tent also does have a rain fly, which I will use if it starts to rain, hopefully not. It does come with 2 poles that you can use to support the roof, which I'll probably throw on in a minute. I've never slept in a tent like this style before. It's almost like a bivvy, except a little bit bigger, and it's kind of raised off the ground, which is interesting. It should keep you a little bit warmer, I think, unless it's windy, then it would suck away your warmth. I don't know, it's just an interesting tent, and I just really wanted to incorporate how it folded up inside of this this camper build, because I thought it'd be really cool to just be able to drive somewhere, just unfold the tent, and 2 seconds you're ready to go. Yeah, I like this. Definitely gonna have to take my boots off before I lay them in here. It is muddy out here. This is gonna be cool. It's got like doors on all the sides. Yeah, it's so cool. It's like tiny, but it's not like so tiny where you feel claustrophobic. It's like the perfect small tent. It weighs like 30 pounds though because of like the metal steel frame, but other than that, it's pretty small and it's pretty sweet, and I'm definitely excited to try it out. Well, I think it's time to unpack the rest of the gear, set up camp, and get nice and cozy. Okay. Not only is this a spot for my feet to rest when I'm driving this thing around, I also made it a little bit extra long so I could use it as a bit of like a tabletop and a place for myself to cook, hang out on, just place things on, and just like a nice little kitchen table. Pretty cool. All right, In this bigger container right here, just got all sorts of camping gear and food and stuff like that. Got a heated electric blanket, got a tarp just in case it rains. I wanted to have some protection. In this smaller container, just have pretty much all my little appliances. Got my cookware. You can see I have a small little water boiler, which is something I actually want to use right now because I think it's a wonderful time for a nice cup of tea. Starting to get cold out and I want to warm myself back up. Got a cool little electric kettle. I've used this thing in the past, but in order to boil up our tea, we are going to have to use our inverter. Alright. Go ahead and use our little quick connect plug. Oh, I love that. And we can pop over here. Oh, here it is. Turn on our inverter. And now we got some power running through this port right here. And I brought an extension cord that I can run all the way up to the front. I also got my watt meter. I always like to know how much power I'm drawing. And we can go ahead and fill this up with some water. That's perfect. We can boil some water. And this thing is pulling right around 583 watts. Cool. Running off the battery, going to the inverter, powering our little kettle to boil some water. And the tea I'm going to have is some licorice spice tea. Tasty, flavorful, and should be nice and warm in this chilly, cool gray day. You can already start to hear it making some noise over here. Bubble, bubble. Perfect. Go and power that down, and we can make ourselves a nice warm cup of tea. Perfect. Nice warm cup of tea. In case you're curious, it used 1%. We're at 86% right now, so I used 1% to boil up that water. And I also got myself some trail mix, which is going to be a nice little treat to go along with it. Cheers. Some nice trail mix as well. I'm really happy with how this thing turned out. It was really fun to drive around too. Honestly, it would probably perform better if I just had regular tires on there. It takes so much energy to get these tracks moving. But honestly, the cool factor makes it totally worth it using the tracks. It's a nice sweet tea. Tastes like black licorice, just a little bit. But I love it. If you can see, I did bring a little thermometer just to kind of keep track of the temperature. It's 47 degrees Fahrenheit right now. Really not too bad. It's the first taste of winter camping today. Not too bad at all. This thing is just so many bolts. I use so many bolts to put it all together. But I'm definitely happy with how it came out. So much fun. Definitely cooling down a little bit. I ended up grabbing 2 hand warmers just so I can clutch them every once in a while. It's mostly my hands that are getting a little bit cold. I'm also getting a little bit hungry, and I got something pretty delicious planned for dinner. And that is, we're going to make some delicious pasta. And I ended up going with these fun little kind of pinwheel noodles, little wagon wheel noodles. Pretty fun. And we're going to be making a special type of pasta my nana would make called aglio olio. Super simple. You only need a couple things. You got garlic, you got some olive oil, some Italian parsley, some red pepper flakes, some salt, and some Parmesan for good measure. And that's it. And for cooking this meal, I'm going to be using some propane and a little stove, just so I don't have to use any of my battery energy, keep it for later, keep it for the drive home. And also, I've used an electric hot plate in the past, and it takes like 40 minutes to boil a thing of water, which is just unreasonably slow. So we're going with the good old propane stove today. Step 1, chop some garlic. Prepare to have your fingers smell like garlic. for at least a day. There we go. Got all our garlic chopped up. Now we can take our parsley and chop up some of this. Alright, got our parsley all chopped up. Now we can take some olive oil, add it to the pan, add our garlic and parsley, and add in some salt. Now we can turn this thing on. I don't know if you can even see the flames, they're pretty invisible. There's the tiniest little flames in there, I don't know if you can see them. Just little blue flames. And we gotta cook this down just to kind of get everything nice and good. It's starting to smell so good. I love the smell of garlic. You definitely don't want to burn it, but you just want to cook it enough to get all them flavors out. It's pretty calm out right now. Perfect day for some pasta. I think this is about ready to go. Is it gonna burn the wood? Nah, I'll be fine. Alright. Got our little water situation. I really like this little spigot. Alright. The only thing about having one burner, it's convenient to bring, but it means that this is going to get a little bit cold while the noodles cook. But I can always warm it up a little bit before I combine it all together. Looks like the rain is staying away, but the clouds are still here. It gets very gray this time of year. It's still a beautiful time to be out. While we got our water starting to heat up, it's time to do ourselves a little cheese check. Got a nice little block of Parmesan. Let's go ahead and just give it a little taste, why not? Yeah, very good. I also got another little hanging garbage bag similar to the one I got for my other camper, and I can just go ahead and hang it up here so I can toss out just little garbage. Nice. Woo. When it's breezy, it's cold. And I kind of forgot to put in the pepper flakes inside here. I guess I'm gonna do it now. I can't believe I missed the part of adding in the red pepper flakes. Just a little pinchful. I like a little bit extra, so I like some spice. The water's starting to boil. Now it's time to add in our wagon wheels. These are just such a fun little shape. I've never actually cooked these before. I thought it'd be perfect for today. This was always one of my favorite meals my Nana would make. Delicious, simple, and a little bit of spice. And if you can tell, my cheese blocks keep shrinking. Gets them a little bit hungry. Oh yeah, these wheels are looking good. Alright, time to strain it. And the cool thing about this cooking set, it's got like a built-in strainer on the lid. The only problem is, it's very hot right now. So I'm going to glove up, and hopefully don't melt my gloves. Alright. Ooh, hot. In goes the sauce. Let's add the rest of our salt. And mix up these wheels. It's like a very light pasta. It's one of my favorites, to be honest. Ooh, it's still pretty hot. These are such funny noodles. Some Parmesan. I don't really have a grater, so I'm just gonna... Alright. Let's give this a taste. Oh, this is so good. One of the best. And these noodles are great. They're super easy to pick up on a fork. Oh, so good. Like all my builds, they always take a little bit longer than I expect them to take. The longest part for this build was actually just waiting for some of the parts to come in. It took right around a month for the tracks to come in. That was something I was waiting on for a while. But other than that, I managed to build the vehicle in like 8 days, which is pretty good. But by the time I had all the parts come in, I had everything pretty much planned out to a T. There's just a couple things I wasn't sure about, like how tall I wanted the roof to be, or like how long I needed to make the section for the tent to fold out. There's just a few things I needed to figure out, but it wasn't too hard. I really like using the square slotted tubing because it's just like playing with a giant set of like erector sets or Meccano or Lego. You can kind of just slot things together, change them if you want, move them around, or if you want to completely disassemble it, make something new from it, you can go ahead and do that. It's going to start getting dark pretty soon out here. I do think I am going to drive around a little bit at night and find a different spot, just because it's fun to drive this thing, and driving at night is just a whole nother experience. I love me some pasta. This aglio olio is so good. I love getting the little pepper flakes every once in a while. I always love the challenge and the excitement of putting together and building a new vehicle. It's just so much fun for me, just taking all these components and putting them together and making these fun, wacky vehicles. And it's always a lot of work to get these videos up and running, and they always take a lot longer than I expect them to take. But I truly think it's worth it, and I truly hope you enjoy as much as I do building and taking these things out and just having a wonderful time. Cheers. Oh, honestly, give it a try. One of my favorite pastas ever. Delicious. Oh, I'm stuffed. It was so good though. You can probably tell I packed up pretty much everything that was out right now. Put the thing on the roof, put the other container here. Still got the tent out. I probably have a little bit less than an hour of sunlight, and I think it's just gonna be easier to load this up now while there's some light in the sky. And then when it's dark, I could just easily fold up the tent and take this thing for a drive, because I definitely want to drive this thing at night, and it's just a little bit easier if I pack this stuff up now. But yeah, I think it's time to just head inside the tent, relax after eating that delicious meal, and just hang out. Alright, and I also brought my little camping slippers. These things are great, especially starting to get colder out. I'm going to go ahead and toss in a couple hand warmers in each of them, and these things are going to be beautiful. This tent's honestly, it's comfy. It's pretty sweet. It feels roomier than it looks on the outside, which is good because I don't really necessarily like small spaces, but this is nice. This is nice. It kind of reminds me of the first camper I made that was inside of a greenhouse. It's kind of like that, except maybe half the size or something like that. Still, not too bad at all. To be honest, like the bottom of this tent, it's pretty comfy. It's almost like a hammock. Your body kind of conforms to it a little bit, but it's not like super loose. I like it better than a hammock. I can hear some geese or ducks somewhere over in the distance. Kind of a calming noise. Well, I still have a few minutes of light left. I'm going to go ahead and fold up this tent. And I'm going to leave my little slippers inside. Hopefully they'll fold up in here and it won't be a problem. But we'll see. It's definitely starting to cool down a bit. I love how fast the tent folds away. So convenient. Oh, love it. Man, there's a whole lot of stuff on here. It's cold. I think I have to put on some gloves. Much better. I like how this thing is just such a small little thumbprint. Just so much gear and technology just all shoved down this tiny little package. I mean, it's still pretty big, but it's way smaller than some of the stuff I've been making. So cool. And in just a few more minutes, it's going to be pretty dark out, and I want to take this thing for a bit of a ride. I want to find this place somewhere back this way, not really sure where, but hopefully I can find 2 evenly spaced trees, because I have something pretty cool I have planned later. If I can find a place for it, hopefully I can. All the birds are flying south. So cool. They got a long journey. And now we're about to start ours. Alright. Oh, I love the lights. It's so cool. Let's go. Oh, these lights are bright too. It literally feels like I'm driving around a moon buggy or something. I see a rabbit. You got a little bunny rabbit over there. Hi, buddy. These lights are so bright, I don't think it really sees me. I mean, I don't think it... I think it's like a deer in a headlight right now, but you see a little bunny right there. Hi. Hey, it's okay. Little cute bunny. Alright, you be good. I'll see you later. I've been driving around for a bit. I did a couple loops, and I think I'm going to end up using some of these trees. I think these are the best options that I have right now. Alright. Took a while of driving around, but we got 2 trees right here. I don't know if you can see them because these lights are just so bright, but I'm planning on using these for what I got going on. For now, I think it's time to unload all the gear and set up camp for the night. Brought my little mattress pad. And this is a nice sleeping bag. Oh yeah. I also ended up bringing a heated blanket, which is going to be wonderful for tonight. Got our tent all set up. Got our sleeping bag and our heated blanket in there. I did remember to forget to bring a pillow, so I'm going to be using probably my sweatshirt as a pillow, which isn't the first time, but it'll be fine. And these lights are so bright. It's hard to pick up on camera, but they just blind you. Anyways, we're at this spot right here where there's like 2 trees, kind of evenly spaced here. I don't know if you can see my camera, but the reason I was looking for some trees is because I brought this. And some of you are saying, what is this? So first, let's set it up and I'll show you. Got myself a flashlight and you can see the trees right here. And if you haven't guessed what it is, it's a projector screen. That's right. I brought a little projector. We're gonna have ourselves a nice little relaxing end of the night. I think it'd be pretty cool. I've never set this up, and honestly, these trees are perfect. I didn't measure them or anything, just kind of guessed, and it worked out. Go ahead and grab the projector. I'm gonna slap this thing on a tripod and see what we can do. What does one do once they bring a projector out camping? Well, let me tell you. They also bring their Steam Deck so they can play some games. Let's have some fun. Yeah, this is pretty ridiculous, but hey, let's have some fun. And I want to play some Half-Life 2. Came out with some new updates, and I think it's pretty cool, and I'll give some love to it. It's pretty crazy. The wind makes the screen blow around, and it makes it look like everything's underwater. A really interesting effect. No. Uh-oh. See ya. Oh, my hands are freezing. I think I'm done playing some games for now. Maybe watch a movie or something while my hands warm up. Oof. Oh, my Steam Deck is so cold. That was a lot of fun though. Cleaned up all the gaming stuff. Still got the projector out. Probably going to keep the screen up just all night and take it down in the morning. Just going to watch some YouTube and have myself a little snack. And the snack I want to have is some popcorn. And in order to make this, I got a little popcorn maker. And we got our big old inverter out here, so should be able to handle it no problem. The way this popcorn machine works, you fill up this little section. This is like the top section. And you slot it on. You just plug it in. And we're pulling 970 watts. And I can also use the top of this as a nice little hand warmer because they're freezing from playing that game. It's starting to happen. Smells good. And it seems to be slowing down quite a bit. I'm going to go ahead and call it. There we go. Now what you're supposed to do, recap the bottom, and then flip it. And it's like a bucket. And got some fresh popcorn. Oh, it's so warm. Got my popcorn, got my projector on, watching some YouTube. Just a perfect way to end the night. That popcorn machine did a fantastic job, even in the cold. Also, if you're curious how much power we used kind of moving the vehicle and making our popcorn, I think I was at like 87 or 83. I'm not 100% sure, but right now I'm at 71%. So far we used 29% total of our battery. We have more than enough power to use the heated blanket all night long, which is really what I would like to do. I mean, I'd be fine without it. It's just like a luxury, which is super nice. And I just want to at least have like 20% to just drive back tomorrow, just to give myself a little bit cushion so I don't have to worry so much. And there's no way the heated blanket is gonna like eat up 50% of the battery. That'd be insane. But yeah, we're doing good with power, really nothing to worry about. And the popcorn machine did a fantastic job. It is so good. Alright, packing up everything. Now I can take power from my inverter. I also threw out the other half of my thermometer outside, so I'll be able to monitor outside temperature versus the inside temperature. Let's head on in. Let's go ahead and plug in our heated blanket and get it warming up in here. Turn it on, set it up to max. I forgot what this thing draws. Wow, 132 watts. Alright, let's get it nice and warm in here. And right now, we're starting at 42 degrees. We'll see what we get up to tonight. Alright, I am in my little tent, all tucked in my sleeping bag. I didn't end up putting in those 2 tent poles. I just didn't think it was super necessary tonight. It's not like crazy windy or anything, and the tent does a pretty good job at keeping its own shape without those poles across. I'm using my hat I was wearing as a pillow and just kind of wrapped around here. Got my heated blanket on. I'm gonna make sure it's up to full blast. This thing is already feeling nice and warm. I'm just in this like warm wrapped burrito of goodness, and I'm gonna sleep so good in here and be so warm. I'm so excited. It's
honestly been a wonderful day, and I am tired and ready for some wonderful sleep. So I'll catch you on the morning, and sleep good. Good morning. Oh wow. The tent is super wet. All the condensation. Oh wow. Cold glasses. Oh, it's so warm in the sleeping bag. It's 40 degrees outside and 84 degrees in here. I definitely had to turn down the heated blanket last night. It got way too hot and I had to take off a bunch of layers. But it felt so nice. If you're curious about battery, right now we're at 63% battery. So we used 6% using the heated blanket all night long, which is really not too bad. So we got more than enough juice to play around with this morning. I think it's time to get up and poke around outside. I just got my slippers on now. They're kind of waterproof. A little bit chilly this morning. So I woke up yesterday at 1 in the morning. I guess it was raining last night. Nothing crazy, but still, I was too tired and too warm to get out and put on the rain fly. It really wasn't anything serious. I think a nice warm cup of tea sounds amazing right now. A little water boiler. And let's make ourselves a nice little cup of some peach tea. Oh, I love this little thermos thing. It's colder out today. It's 39 outside. The thermometer's still cooling down itself. And I busted out some hand warmers again. I slept pretty well last night though. Honestly, that tent, pretty comfortable. The only thing that I'm not a huge fan of is how much condensation it trapped inside. It felt like the walls were just dripping wet, and I thought it was because of the rain last night, but not even. The outside of the tent was completely dry and the inside was just like a sweaty mess. But it felt amazing inside the sleeping bag. And again, it's a gray, cool day. Bubble, bubble. Some nice hot tea. It smells amazing. Cheers. Oh, the mug is freezing. I'm gonna warm up with a cup of tea, and then in a few minutes I think it's time to get some breakfast going. And for breakfast, since I got an upgraded inverter, I got myself an upgraded waffle machine. This thing's pretty cool. It reminds me of those waffle machines you'd find in a hotel lobby or something. Yeah, so let's make ourselves some delicious giant Belgian waffles. Add our oil, and let's mix it up. Delicious. Let's plug in our waffle maker, and we're pulling right around 940 watts. Oh, this is gonna be some fancy breakfast today. And you spin it. How cool is that? Feels good, nice and warm. This is a serious waffle maker. We've upgraded from the small one I was using in the past. Nothing like just hanging out outside, making some Belgian waffles. Alright, it clicked green. I think we're good. Open it. Oh yeah, oh, it's a smaller one. Oh, sweet. That worked beautifully. That is some serious waffle. Love it. Alright, let's just keep this going. Flip it. It's so cool. Since it's cold out, I want to go ahead and eat these waffles before they cool down. And I put my honey on my waffle maker while it's cooking. Hopefully it'll warm it up a little bit. Cheers. Yeah. We are in serious waffle town now. Those are good.
fresh honey and waffles on a beautiful morning. The waffle maker is pretty quick. Oh, I left that in there a little bit too long. Oh, this is awesome. I think that's about all the waffles I'm going to get. Beautiful. Wow, these waffles came out fantastic. This is like the most luxurious breakfast I've had out here. Oh. What a beautiful morning. And the last waffle complete. Woo. Beautiful. I cooked them so quick. That was amazing. We're at 59% right now, so we used 4% to cook our waffles. Not bad at all. Not too bad at all. The inverter ended up doing a fantastic job. Not a problem at all, especially in this cold weather. As it starts to get warmer though, maybe in like the summer or springtime, I'm gonna probably have to punch some holes in there and add some like vent fans. But in the winter, the world is pretty much its heat sink, so I don't have to worry about it overheating. And it performed well. It pumped these waffles out in like 10 minutes, it felt like. Delicious, and they're all still warm. I have a lot of fun building and inventing and creating these wild, wacky machines and taking them out. It's just a blast to see how they actually perform and how they actually go from just a bunch of graph paper to this wacky machine in front of me. And it's just a wonderful time, and I truly hope you enjoy the process and the adventure with me as much as I do. And I hope these videos inspire some of you to get out there and make something and be creative, or just enjoy nature, or just have a wonderful time following along on the ride with me. Anyways, I'm just going to be finishing up my breakfast, drinking the rest of my tea, relaxing a little bit. That's going to be time to pack up camp and head on home. Well, it's a beautiful, cool morning. Camp's all packed up, and it's been a wonderful adventure. I truly hope you enjoyed these videos and the process with me, from building my machine to taking them out and just enjoying a beautiful night in them. Anyways, it's time for me to head on back. Thanks for stopping by, everybody, and I'll catch you all in the next one. So it can do some 360s in place, but not that well, and it digs up a whole lot of dirt. Don't recommend it. But the tracks didn't rip. Beautiful. Your camera fell.